I'm Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Clean up your damn room. Stand up straight with your shoulders back and listen to the Patrick Coffin Show.
Welcome to the show. Lots to talk about. We're going to talk about the sex abuse crisis, and we're going to start by connecting some dots that you probably haven't thought were connectable. And that is there any tie, any connection at all between the change of the Catechism of the Catholic Church with respect to the death penalty and the handling of the sex abuse crisis in light of the grand jury report and the Vigano letter as well? Our guest has tied them together, and we're going to have lots to talk about in this fascinating episode of The Patrick Coffin Show, which starts right about now. Dr. Michael Pakaluk is Associate Dean and Professor at the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. He's our guest today. His expertise lies in Aristotelian ethics and classical philosophy, Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas, and Blessed John Henry Cardinal Newman. He received his PhD in philosophy at Harvard University and has been writing about things philosophical and Thomistic ever since. He's also the author of The Appalling Strangeness of the Mercy of God, another Ignatius Press title. Mike Pakaluk, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
I want to get to your essay in First Things, the 22nd of April edition of First Things on capital punishment. But I want to maybe start...
August.
Pardon me? August. What did I say?
Yeah, 22nd April.
Oh, I have a spoonerism with April and August and cake and pie. When I say cake, I mean pie. Anyway, so very good. August
is not the cruelest month.
That's true. Let's start with the appalling strangeness of the mercy of God and the story of your conversion and loss of your wife, Ruth. And what's the elevator version of that book?
Mother of 6 children, gets diagnosed with breast cancer when she's about 30 years old, suffers through chemotherapy for many years. She's president of the pro-life group, very gung-ho pro-life, a woman of intense piety who shows tremendous faithfulness until her death. And it's just a great story of the whole culture of life.
Were you a Catholic before you met her?
No. I was not. No, we both converted together. We were both at Harvard as undergraduates. We were atheists, really. Mm-hmm.
And with the increase of your tribe, you get more and more kids together. Was that goodbye must have been wrenching for everybody. It's odd that would parallel a conversion, because atheists love to use the suffering of innocence as an example of why God couldn't possibly exist. So you kind of went upstream. By God's grace, I suppose.
Well, we converted together when we first met. And we became Christians before we got married. Okay. And then very soon after getting married, we became Catholics. So we were married for 20 years. And she grew, I hope I grew as well, but she definitely grew more and more deeply in the faith. And was just a great, solid kind of paragon of Catholic faith. And I remember she was really just a few weeks from dying, and I kind of wanted to challenge her. I said something like, I don't know, I'm not being like a tempter who's raising doubts, but I said, how do you? This is baffling. How do you make sense of this? And she really, you kind of look someone in the eye, you know whether they're kind of saying what the script is for them or if they really believe it. She said, I have absolute confidence that what God wills for me is the best thing for me and for everyone.
Wow.
It's kind of the end of the story. There's no discussion there.
Yeah. And she had a sense of who you'd marry next?
Yeah, that's kind of the funny twist about it, that it was actually in August, so she died in September, and this is now 20 years ago. Her 20th anniversary is coming up, September 23rd of her death. But it was... it was in August 20 years ago that, knowing she was going to die soon, her cancer had entered end stages. I kind of asked for the cross in connection with her death, and I kind of, in a certain sense, grew more and more deeply in love with her as she was dying. And I wanted to be wrenched or destroyed, so to speak, by her death, as well as in the way that she was. So I remember we were... it was a summer day. I was professing my love for her and saying I could never get married again. There would be no one like her I could meet. And besides, I wanted to devote myself to scholarship. I'd always loved the times I'd been away, say, at Oxford University, and just spending my time thinking and writing. I'd love to return to that. And she thought that was kind of absurd because I had 2 very young children and, 6 children altogether living at home. So she kind of paused. It's so vivid even now that she kind of folded her fingers and put them over her stomach and said, well, she said, first of all, well, you really need to get married again because of the 2 young girls in particular. She said, I've always had a thought that Catherine Hardy would make a good wife for you. And Catherine Hardy was the eldest daughter of some friends of ours, and she had been studying at the University of Pennsylvania. And she said the fact that Catherine Hardy has just moved to Boston kind of confirms that intimation. She just started graduate school at Harvard University. And I thought this is very bizarre. Like, you're professing love to your dying wife, and she's kind of matching you up with somebody who just graduated from college.
The world's strangest Cupid.
Very bizarre. It's not so surprising to her because really from the moment that she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she started praying with her friends in rosary groups and so on that I would be able to find a young wife was her specific intention. I don't know. I'm very youthful and athletic and so on. Maybe that's why she said it. But it's after mourning several months, I decided to get in touch with Catherine Hardy, and we started meeting at Harvard Square, and I had to go there for academic reasons, and very quickly fell in love and got married the next year on the Feast of the Assumption.
Wow. September 20th.
And we have 8 children now.
You have 8, so 8 plus 6.
Yeah, or 7 originally, because
7.
Another part of the story of the book is we had a baby who died of crib death.
Oh, I'm sorry. How old was he?
7 weeks old. He was 7 weeks old.
Wow. My daughter
So
married.
a lot of stuff.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, my wife and I lost a baby girl at 15 days in 2006. She had partial trisomy 9. Her name is Naomi. But I remember visiting Naomi with my family on September 23rd, it's my daughter's birthday, and the feast day of St. Padre Pio, as you know.
Yes.
And we had a first-class relic from a friend, and we placed it on. I traced Naomi's head with the relic, and she opened her eyes for 4 hours. First and only time she did that on my daughter's birthday, and then she died on the 29th. So that's all.
That's really amazing. Let me tell you two small stories about Ruth's death. I was teaching at Brown University at the time, and I had to leave during the day. The day she died, I was actually away teaching at Brown University. The morning of, I went to her bedside. She had been in this kind of coma state, really, for almost 2 days. And I was just praying by her side, maybe holding her hand, looking at her face. And she opened her eyes, and her eyes were kind of wandering around. And then they met my eyes. And it was the look of recognition. Yeah. I recognized her, she recognized, we saw each other. And it's so funny how, 2 souls can really connect in a glance. We connected. It was really extraordinary. So then I left for work, and back in those days, they didn't have cell phones, and people said I should get a pager and so on. But so I didn't really know. Yeah, I didn't really know.
People can look up pager in the dictionary. It's a historical artifact, yeah.
I didn't even hurry back from teaching. I remember very clearly, stopped at McDonald's and got a fish sandwich, and then drove home and came in the door at 3:33, I think, which to me is a very significant time because it matches up with Christ's death, 3 o'clock, anything related to 3 in the afternoon and suffering and so on. And people then said, "Michael, come here. She's leaving us. She's leaving. Come here." And I got to the bedside, and really within seconds she passed away. And I've since spoken with priests, and they say dying people sometimes seem to have a sense of when their beloved close people, or husband, wife, son, daughter, father, mother, are actually have arrived, and then they depart. They wait. They can hold on and then wait.
Yeah, it's really almost like they're selecting the time of their exit in a certain way. They're participating in it, or
there's some control.
They're finally letting go, right? Yeah.
It may be a grace. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good way to segue to a topic that you raise in First Things, Capital Punishment and the Sex Abuse Crisis, because it goes to the idea of separation. Let me just quote what you say near the top of the essay. What I want to say on the matter falls under 3 headings: separation, vengeance, and protection. All of these serve to distinguish justice, which the church should uphold, from mere regulatory compliance, which seems the main thing on offer right now from our bishops. We're going to get into this idea of separation of evildoers and how that idea of not wanting to exercise justice with respect to the application of the death penalty and not wanting to separate predator priests from their ministries on the part of bishops. When you say regulatory compliance, are you referring to just the status quo way of dealing with things and not calling the cops, not blowing the whistle?
Well, no, I mean something like what safe spaces and whistleblower hotlines, and so just all the mechanisms that would be used for corporate fraud. They're all valuable. They have a role, but they're not really enough. Mm-hmm. But, I came up with that list by reflecting, frankly, on fatherhood. I actually think I'm a very good father, and so I think sometimes about what is it that I do, which distinguishes me from other people I know who maybe I don't think maybe are as effective as fathers. And I think having a very strong sense of retributive justice is really important to being a father. And go ahead.
Well, retributive justice, we never hear about retributive justice, especially under the current Holy Father's way of thinking. That he even said, as you point out, in 2015, he wrote a letter to the president of the International Commission Against the Death Penalty, and the Holy Father seems to liken life sentences with the death penalty. That to perpetually separate an evildoer from the community is also unjust. That's quite a contrast to vengeance, which, as you point out, Thomas Aquinas regards as a virtue, not blood mob, right? Not mob justice, not emotional revenge, but vengeance. So, yes. So what is retributive justice? Is it a synonym for vengeance?
Well, I think those three things I mentioned are all part of it. But about that letter that you mentioned, actually, Pope Francis, if you read it carefully, said that even lengthy prison sentences are objectionable because they're equivalent to life sentences, which is true. I mean, if you put somebody in jail who's 50 years old for a 30-year sentence, it's a life sentence. So even that's objectionable. Mm-hmm. So I think Pope Francis believes that anyone who's sentenced to prison should have some kind of reasonable possibility of parole. But anyway, that's you asked this question about vengeance. Retribution is something like you get what you deserve. And it seems to me when we talk about mercy, for example, you have to have the bottom line, well, you do what you deserve. And mercy would mean you don't get what you deserve. As in the parables of our Lord. The guy could be arrested, put in prison until he pays off his whole debt, but he isn't. He's forgiven that debt, right? But there has to be an underlying claim that he could actually be thrown in prison. And then the guy who goes out in the parable and kind of chokes his own debtor and demands the money back, he's rounded up and he's sent back to prison, right? It's like, there's this underlying foundation of justice that's essential to mercy, it seems to me. And I want to say that this sense of justice is really deeply rooted in love, that you can't really separate what St. Thomas Aquinas calls the virtue of vengeance from deep love for someone. You do see at the same time that it's for their good and that their pathway towards becoming better is accepting the punishment, either the punishment itself or the justice of the punishment. Right? So you say, well, okay, I'm not worthy to be called your son, the prodigal son says, but at the very beginning, he's accepting the justice of punishment. He's received with the fatted calf and so on, but at there is this acceptance of the justice of the punishment.
Yeah, he even rehearses his confession, doesn't he? On his way back.
I mean, some people say that means it's just canned. He doesn't really believe it, and other commentators say no, he takes it seriously. He doesn't want to forget what he wants to say.
Well, let's say that they're right. Let's say he's just saving his own butt and wants to, mouth the right words. He wants to get out of the condition where he's eating less luxuriously than the pigs are back in his dad's farm. That's sufficient for the father.
It's imperfect.
It's imperfect. As we say. Yeah.
Yeah. Any kind of recognition or motion, we can never fully understand how much we've offended God. So all contrition will be imperfect. Mm-hmm. But get back to this point of vengeance. I mean, as a father, when my son does something wrong, I kind of want to track him down. I mean, I want to kind of find him. Sometimes I actually chase the little guy around the house. I want to track him down and make sure that he gets the punishment that's due. Or if mercy or consideration for weakness have their role, then that has a role. But it's the love which motivates it from the very start. There's no dualism between loving somebody and vengeance in this real sense of the term, that you want to see them punished or the punishment remitted, but there has to be some connection between the wrongdoing and the punishment. So I think that,
go ahead.
yes, and I think this is really, in the essay I bring in separation, vengeance, and protectiveness, because I think it's that same persistence and stubbornness in wanting to see wrongdoing punished that leads to the protective aspect of the father. So the father wants to safeguard his children and wants to see that they don't harm one another, and outraged if one of his children does something that really harms another one of his children. All of the whole engagement of the emotions, which in the classical theory it's called the irascible faculty. It's related to anger. There's long debates in the ancient world: is anger a vice of itself, or is it a virtue? And the Stoics said that, or some philosophers said that anger was always wrong and always a vice. And I think a lot of Catholics seem to have adopted that view. The Aristotelian, Thomistic, and the classical view generally, and the Catholic view over centuries, is that anger is very important. It's a very important part of our personalities. And to be good and to be just, anger has to be rational, but still it's very important. You have to kind of feel it in your gut. Yeah. So I contrast it with the kind of complacency of, the corporate response to these things is very matter of fact and very, shuffling papers around, and there's not the engagement. And I think lay Catholics who are very angry now, and they see the absence of a similar anger in their bishops, because anger is appropriate now.
Anger is appropriate now. Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it. I read one bishop's response where he said he appreciated the righteous anger of some toward the bishops. My first thought was, he doesn't share it. He's not righteously angry, but he...
exactly. Righteous anger, that's vengeance. Go ahead.
I think you're right to root this in fatherhood, and the paternal protection of children is rooted in a deep love. How much of this crisis with respect to the non-response by the bishops, or the going along to get along, the regulatory compliance, parsing everything to death, super slow, kind of bureaucratic answer to it, how much of that passivity is related to the crisis of fatherhood generally? Is because bishops are our fathers, priests are our fathers, and they don't exist in a vacuum. They grew up in our culture, which is completely screwed up with respect to good fatherhood. Do you think this is tied in some way to a crisis of fatherhood?
Yeah, the attack on patriarchy, which is governance or authority of fathers. Okay, obviously fathers alone don't rule the world, and they shouldn't, but they should have some kind of authority. Of course, a general effeminate ideal of men these days. What was it, the pajama boy getting the Obamacare benefits? I mean, that was all ridiculed to death, but there was truth to that, right? So, this is, it's just throughout our whole society. I mean, some people link it to estrogen in the water, whatever it is, but there's a real, testosterone is going down, and sperm counts and everything else. So there's certainly a kind of a loss of that kind of strength and virility. Virility comes from the word for manliness and strength. So that's definitely a problem throughout all of this, our society. It's affecting the bishops. Catholicism is supposed to provide an antidote or correction to things that are distorted or twisted in our society, and it's absolutely not doing that in this case.
Well, that creates multiple problems, and one problem it creates is an obstacle for people who are interested in the claims of the church, and they see how poorly the leaders reacted to sex abuse and homosexual predators, and now it's going all the way to the highest level of the church. This is a crisis of trust now.
Yes. Definitely.
We can say, hey, it's the number of accused never rose above 4%, according to the John Jay report, which is true. Hey, the Catholic Church is always singled out by the press for it's like we're held to a higher standard, which is true. But we should be held to a higher standard. We're saying we're the
Absolutely.
church that Jesus Christ founded. It's almost like our so-called enemies in the press have an intuition about what the church should be, and because we're not, they go after us in the way they don't go after the Foursquare Baptist Church or swimming coaches.
Yeah, and bishops are supposed to be select. If you go back to the New Testament, what the apostles say, they're supposed to be really special. They're really exemplary Christians. Look, you and I have friends. We know that there are people who live double lives, and you would never guess that they have this dark side to them. But generally, we can kind of pick out from among our friends kind of the really solid ones, and they're very solid and reliable people. I'd have entrust my children to them. But those are the kinds of characters our bishops should be. They shouldn't be these kind of spotty people with double lives and you can't look you straight in the eye, that kind of thing.
Right. I just want to revisit the definition that you lay out for vengeance. You say it's the habit of soul by which we earnestly wish that offenders receive due punishment. It's a virtue, not a vice.
Yes.
And you bring up the example, and I agree with you. As a father, if I learned that Father so-and-so in any way interfered with my son or touched his genitals, I would want him defrocked. I'd want him gone.
Yes. Yeah, just once. Right. It's not the sort of thing you just kind of randomly wander into, as in the Pennsylvania grand jury report. Some priest at night had some young man sleeping next door, and he came into the room and started fondling his member, and the guy objected. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that." Well, guess what? You don't just kind of randomly wander into someone's room and start doing that. If you do, that speaks to very, very serious deficiency in your character, and you should just basically be removed.
Yeah, I love the word mistake. I thought a mistake was more something you do with algebra, not something you find yourself in bed with someone of the
Exactly.
same or opposite sex. Yeah, mistake. You say, I want to turn now to the death penalty change up, because I'm going to be speaking with Ed Fazer on this as well. It's a deep problem, the new phrasing of the Catechism. I as a untrained canonist, think that this is discontinuity with the previous phrasing in a way that I don't think is true of the John Paul II change-up to its earlier iteration. I think this new, not admissible in any case, is a problem. And you say, retribution, with respect to retribution, the Holy Father seems to regard retribution as nonsensical. When the death penalty is applied, people are killed not for current acts of aggression, but for offenses committed in the past. This is Pope Francis now. Moreover, it is applied to people whose capacity to cause harm is not current, but has already been neutralized, who are deprived of their freedom. Well, yes, but all criminal acts that get you in prison were committed in the past.
Yes,
100%
exactly.
of them. But people do commit crimes from prison. They harm other prisoners. They arrange murders outside prison. Happens all the time. So this part does not compute with me. Do you see
But the punishment is not for that. The punishment is for something in the past. So this is retributive justice. It happened in the past, and we're now going to apply the punishment for something happened in the past. It's not to protect the society in the first instance. The first instance, it's to pay you back for what you did in the past. Mm-hmm. So that statement of the Holy Father, it seems to me, says that in itself is nonsensical. But the Catechism does say that retributive justice is the basis for all punishment. It has to be, otherwise we could find an innocent person and put him in prison as an example to others, or we could try to predict when people are going to commit crimes. And it's actually, you can do this now with enough data about people. We can figure out when they're more likely to commit crimes or highly likely to commit crimes, and then arrest them to protect society. That wouldn't be just at all. Yeah, because they haven't committed any crimes yet.
Right. There's a movie about this, Minority Report, Steven Spielberg film.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get the evildoer before he commits evil.
I think it's kind of providential that Ed Fazer wrote this book on capital punishment, because can you find somebody who's more kind of stubborn for good and plain speaking and clear thinking than Ed Fazer?
Yeah,
So he kind of picks this topic right now to write on. Wow. I mean, that's a big block in the road, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's providential. Another one I'll be speaking with is Leon Podles, who wrote The Church Impotent. He also wrote a book in 2008 called Sacrilege, Sexual Abuse in the Catholic Church. And Podles is not, he's not a lefty with an axe to grind. He's not a ticked-off traddy. He's an orthodox, scholarly guy, very balanced, and wants the church to succeed. But no, everyone ignored the book, or he was, kind of written off as off the wall.
Podles is underappreciated. He also writes a lot on this question of kind of the effeminate character of the church and spirituality, and he has good things to say about that too.
That's a good title, The Church Impotent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I think the correct story of this is that Pope Francis wanted to find the death penalty to be intrinsically wrong. I think his statement from October last year basically said that. I think the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, saw that would have been incompatible with the tradition. I think they insisted on this word inadmissible. And then if you read the statement preceded by the word, introduced by the word consequently, and has several antecedents, it ends up, if you read it in a strict legal sense, in a lawyer's way, looking at the strict meaning, it ends up, in fact, saying nothing more than what was said before by Pope John Paul II. It's just a very, very strong affirmation of the Pope's wish that the death penalty not be employed, and it can't be anything more than a prudential judgment. However, It remains true that the revision and the statement give a very different impression to people generally. And to my mind, that's one of the strongest objections to it, that it's the laity who have responsibility for the secular order, and we actually have to do so with conscience. We have to understand God's law and the principles that are at play, and then apply them as by our best lights. And if we are free to use capital punishment, if certain criteria are met, let's say the older, clearer teaching of Pope John Paul II, then we shouldn't be hindered by any sense that we're, not being obedient to the Pope in doing so. That's a kind of burden on the conscience of the laity that really is not appropriate.
Well, this goes to the teaching of Lumen Gentium. I think it's Lumen Gentium 25, because Catholics on the left are now saying, hey, you have to provide religious submission of the will and intellect now. The Catechism is a sure norm for the faith, according to St. John Paul II. So I'm imagining a Catholic juror on a capital murder trial. Would he be able, in good conscience, to vote for the death penalty if the situation did satisfy the stringent requirement of John Paul II? Because this is just the way I read it. If you look at the number of abortions that happened this month in California, they exceed the total number of capital criminals executed in the United States since 1976, just over about 1,400. That, to me, statistically is rare, if not practically non-existent.
Yeah, I was asked to write a blurb for Ed Fazer's book, and I did some kind of calculation. I took all the acreage in the United States, and I took all the persons convicted of capital punishment in the last year, and the last 10 years, it's just a handful. If you kind of scattered them across the United States, like you'd find like one in upstate New York, and if we found like one, if there were a bird that you were going to find one in all of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, we definitely would say it was rare, right? I mean, this is like so exquisitely rare, so unbelievably rare, given the numbers of crimes and serious. That's I did it in proportion to the number of serious.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. That's good.
Yeah.
Not only admissible in all cases, but it doesn't seem to distinguish the prison system in, Florida with Cambodia or Libya or Saudi Arabia or North Korea. Are all prison systems in every country created equal? Would they all fall under inadmissible in all cases? I guess all means all.
Yeah. Or what about looters being shot on sight? Is that no longer possible? I mean, that in effect is a kind of active decree of capital punishment. So looters can't be shot. How about then? In some cases, they can't be stopped. Then
home invaders.
Yeah. Well, self-defense is called into question. It seems to me by the same logic, because the older version of Catechism, there's a clear and correct linkage between all types of self-defense and capital punishment. So if you call into question capital punishment as a legitimate means of society for defending itself, you call into question all self-defense, it seems to me.
You mentioned the third element in addition to separation and vengeance, and that's protection. And you say vengeance takes on a combative aspect. It's a noticeable trait on strong fathers. Well, if you don't have strong fathers, you're not going to have combativeness. You're not going to have that warrior, as the kids say, animal spirit. You're going to have something more like Barney or Mr. Rogers.
Yeah. Let's go back to separation, though. So
Okay.
we didn't really talk about that too much. That it seems to be part of how we deal with somebody who's transgressed the rules of community, that they're separated from that community until somehow they make redress. They pay their dues, they pay their time, however we want to put it. They're separated from that community. And we do this as parents, go to your room, or you can't play on that sports team, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a deep intuitive connection between offending against the community and separation from the community. Now, there's some cases where communities have wanted to separate the criminal in a definitive way for their own good and self-image, so that they want to make a definitive statement that we want nothing whatsoever to do with this kind of criminality. Mm-hmm. And the case I give in the article is the Nuremberg criminals. I mean, they were mass murderers. But
Michael, for people who don't know what the Nuremberg Trial is, what was it, and who was executed and why?
So after World War II, probably millions of Germans could have been put on trial for capital crimes. But as St. Thomas Aquinas says, that punishment is always medicinal in our state, in human life. It's not absolute. God is the one who absolutely reckons everything up. We do so in a kind of medicinal way. And so we searched for the leaders of the Nazi criminal conspiracy, and we put them on trial in the old courthouse in Nuremberg, Germany. And a dozen of them or so, a couple of dozen, were found guilty of crimes against humanity and the crime of aggressive war. But I think 8 or 12 were sentenced to death. It's interesting, very measured given the horrific crimes that they committed. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why they wanted to be sentenced to death was so that they wanted these criminals to be sentenced, that society could make a declarative and definitive statement that we just do not want these Nazis around, even in prison. We just don't want them around in the next generation. Mm-hmm. Want to be gone from the face of the earth, because that's how much we want to kind of throw off anything related to Nazism.
The Chris Rock protocol. They've got to go. And as you point out, not just end their lives, but almost make them deader than dead. Execute them, and then separate their scatter their ashes. So
it's kind of exactly. They were cremated, and this was deliberately, and then their ashes were scattered so that nobody could go to their gravesite, nobody could give them any kind of honors or make pilgrimages or whatever. They were absolutely as made as not. Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting. One of them committed suicide. Goering. The day before, somebody smuggled in a cyanide capsule, and he chewed on that, and he died. Mm-hmm. And this was regarded as a tremendous defeat of justice. So it's not just that he died, right?
Right. He caused his own death.
It's society affects his death, so that it's an act of society, and only by being an act of society can it declare or state anything. State society's absolute repugnance and rejection of what he stood for. He denied society the chance to make that statement by committing suicide.
Well, that's an extreme example of the same principle here, isn't it?
Yes.
And a difference of how the culture has shifted in the last 50 years in our attitude toward justice and toward retribution and toward protection and toward punishment. Now everything is so therapeutized and medicalized. People aren't sinners anymore. They have conditions. They're not responsible. We throw the word addict around quite a bit. And there's a move now to reframe pedophilia as a kind of DSM condition rather than something despicable that needs to be punished. It's all treated like something clinical that needs to be medicated.
Yeah, a denial of responsibility. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's at the heart of it too. Do you think that in some ways the churches and her leaders especially are succumbing to a kind of moral panic over the grand jury report? I mean, the purpose of a grand jury is to secure indictments, and out of 301, I think they got 2 indictments, which means, put another way, 299 priests who will not get their day in court. The evidence was not there to bring it to trial. I just see leader after leader presuming that every single accusation is accurate, and some of them have already been challenged publicly now that it's been released. I just see a pendulum swing, which is dangerous in the opposite direction.
I don't really see that. I mean, I think you're right that an accusation is not a complaint, is not an indictment, which is not a conviction. So, yeah, I agree with that. But I don't see people moving in that direction. I think that they believe that since this is just a subset of the diocese in Pennsylvania, which is just one among many states, we have here just a sample. And sure, if not every accusation pans out, enough of them do to create a kind of very, very serious general problem.
Oh, 100%. I agree with that entirely. And sometimes I've wondered if what the best thing for the church would be is 49 more grand jury reports. We got Pennsylvania now. There's 49 other states to come under the scrutiny. Because why weren't Catholic journalists covering this? Why weren't people inside the church acting like journalists? Why is it always people outside the ones we label our enemies have actually done us a great favor by shedding the sharp light of day?
I think you need the power of subpoena. And Ed Dreher was working on this almost 20 years ago. And he said people would not go on the record. He could not get files that he needed to see.
Rod Dreher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rod Dreher. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why he left the Catholic Church for orthodoxy. But I think
I wouldn't call it a reason. I want to be clear about that. I mean, I think so. He repeats too often that he left the Catholic Church on account of this. I think that's a fundamentally irrational thing. If I were a very prominent journalist, I wouldn't keep proclaiming my own irrationality the way he does. But it was a cause. Let's say a cause of his leaving the Catholic Church. Let's say it's an understandable cause, but it's hardly a reason.
Mm-hmm.
They're corrupt. Yeah. There are lots of corrupt and bad people in the church and the hierarchy for its whole history, sure. And surely any convert knows that. It's kind of like the philosopher who, when somebody's daughter died, he wanted to give up the life of pursuing truth or maybe stop believing in God, and he responded, well, did you think that everybody lived forever? I mean, you didn't know your daughter was going to die. I mean, people lose their faith because their child dies. Well, of course, everybody dies. If you don't know that going into having faith, then your faith was not really very strong at the start.
Right, sure. Since you brought us back to separation, I wanted to take one step further and extend your thesis, if I may. You may disagree, but I tie this unwillingness to regard separation as a good, as something that's a function of justice, with the theory proposed by Father Hans-Urs von Balthasar in his now rather famous book, Dare We Hope That All Men Be Saved? The idea that hell might be empty, that we ought to pray that everyone from Adam until the last man enter heaven, seems to fly in the face of our Lord's words and frequent warnings about hell and the teaching of the church that hell is real, that it's not a wordplay, it's not just a verbal threat, that if you die outside of God's friendship, then God being the perfect gentleman, you get what you want. And therefore hell is a place where people go and have gone. Do you think there's some organic connection here between that theory and the unwillingness to punish priests and the unwillingness to punish evildoers? Because we don't even like the idea of being punished with hell because of our own choices.
Well, the popularity of that theory, yeah. I mean, I think there are various things wrong with that theory. First is it doesn't really square with, I think, a serious person's reflections in his own heart. I think that I am aware of the possibility of myself being damned to hell, and I think it's a live possibility that for all of us, and the fear that's connected with that is very real. And if that's true of me, it's true of everyone. So then to say, well, it might be the case that that's never realized, it seems to me to be very strange. And then there's the question of what is best for us to hear and to believe, and that surely the judgment of our Lord is decisive here. And he thought it was important to warn everybody about the possibility of going to hell as something very real. So I can understand Balthasar, well, maybe we could all be saved and so on, but that's not the approach that our Lord took. So if you think of our Lord as like a father who's saying, well, either do this or you're going to get punished, or I'm going to get the wooden spoon out and spank you or something like that, it seems much better to say, well, there is a wooden spoon, and if you don't do this, you will get spanked by the wooden spoon, rather than to say, well, dare we hope that there really isn't a wooden spoon after all. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make a lot of sense, because our Lord is clearly the one in charge here. And the third reason is that, and this, I think the fathers of the church emphasize kind of this reason, is that for human beings, things happen in a natural way. I mean, we don't kind of, okay, I take a pill and I become a virtuous person immediately after that. There are natural human means for doing things. So, for example, if you think, well, on my deathbed, I'm going to convert.
Right.
The wise persons of old would have said, you're much less able to convert on your deathbed than now when you have vigor and your strength of faculties and so on. When you're so weak and tired and potentially angry with God because of your sufferings, you're going to be in a much, much more difficult position for converting at that point.
Yeah. And you've made a whole bunch of bad choices that have further solidified your bad character at that point.
So the idea that, okay, you're going to die, and I know some people, maybe it is the case that you have another possibility of repentance in that nanosecond, between the time you fall off the horse and you hit the ground and you die. But to bank on that, or to say that everybody is going to be saved through that way, almost turns the whole world into a farce. It's all the natural means of working out our salvation in fear and trembling become, so to speak, just irrelevant. That can't be just so.
And doesn't it undermine the missionary motive as well?
Well, it would, yeah. Of course.
Why spill blood for Christ on behalf of savages in foreign lands if we just dare hope that they all might be saved at the end? Which is another way of saying, isn't it, that everyone will repent of their mortal sins before they die? Yeah,
or, I mean, you don't need that. That's kind of the Father Feeney approach, which is fear. Let's just say fear should be a missionary motive, but look, all the great goods we get through baptism, living our lives before we die, that ought to inspire a lot of love for missionary zeal.
Yeah, that's true. That's the positivity part of the motive for sure. Yeah. I ain't no Feeneyite, just FYI.
No, absolutely. I didn't think you were.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on extra ecclesia nulla salus, and the fact that Latin dogmatic formula is on his tombstone, ironically enough, Father Feeney. Can we talk a little bit? We've got a few minutes left, because I want to talk about the lack of chastity from the pulpit. It's making a kind of comeback. You've got the work of Christopher West, and there's a slew of young speakers that are devoted to chastity. But I think the crisis goes to not talking about chastity as a virtue that's doable and is required for human health and maturity and flourishing. You pointed out a little bit at the end of your essay.
Here I was reading Roger's website this morning, and here I do think his notion of benedict option is really important, that chastity is not something that's very easily practiced on one's own. It is highly social and requires support, and that what Catholics need to do is form families where chastity is valued. Colleges should be like that. So, when I went to Ave Maria, I was really kind of struck by the fact that I taught at Ave Maria University for 6 years, that we had a whole lot of kids who had come from households where chastity was highly valued, and then they come to a college environment, and there can actually be a majority culture of kids who want to live chastity, and that it's something that's real. It's not forced. It's not artificial. And I was reading some stupid thing on the internet this morning about how...
What? Stupid thing on the internet? What?
Yeah, I mean, hardly needs to be said. You should point out when you read something that's not stupid, but saying that the priesthood is unnatural because it's not natural to refrain from having sex. And I'm thinking to myself, wait, I'm a married man. I have 15 kids, but what? My normal state is not having sex. It's very easy to reserve yourself for just one person, and all that implies, or for just God. And hey, by the way, the promiscuous person who has 20 hookups in his lifetime, he's not exactly living sex constantly unless he's addicted to pornography, and that's what he means. And that's certainly not a normal form of life.
This is drawn out in the Judd Apatow film, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, who, if you only go by the billboards and the tagline of the movie poster, you think, oh, they're making fun of virginity. But actually, he's the hero. He is the chaste guy. He might be nerdy, but he has his head on straight.
So that's a good movie to see. I've always avoided.
Oh no, it is. Oh no. He has Apatow has two movies that do a jujitsu on the audience by subverting expectations. One is The 40-Year-Old Virgin, the last act of which could have been written by Venerable Pius XII in its great, exalting of chastity and reasonableness with your sexual faculties. And the other one is Knocked Up, which is a thrashingly pro-life movie that seems to be mocking the sanctity of life and pregnancy and all that. But those are two counterexamples of.
Well, that's very interesting because I've always dismissed those two. So maybe I'll.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's potty words. It's it's a teenage sex comedy, but the premise I think is on the right side. My spiritual director, Father John McGoey, used to say that chastity is to the sexual faculty what budgeting is to finance.
Yes.
Yeah, it's guardrails. I like that image.
Yeah.
Well, we're shockingly, sadly, out of time. I'll have to send out my goons and have you back to talk about something else, Dr. Michael Pakaluk. I've learned a ton. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been fun. Thanks.
All right. At patrickcoffin.media, you'll see links to the Appalling Strangeness of the Mercy of God and the other things we talked about today on The Patrick Coffin Show, which this has been. And be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.